Hello again. Today I'm here with my horror and thriller wrap up for May. These are the horror and thriller books that I've read for the month of May. Now, the first book I'm going to talk about actually is an ebook that I picked up, and that is called Black Magic by R. St. Clair. I actually shouted out this woman's channel. She just started a booktube channel, and she had a couple of horror books that she published. So I picked this up on Kindle, and I really like this book. Let me read the description here. Small town music legend Rob Sweeney had everything a man could wish for: success, money, and the love of his life. But when a bitter ex-girlfriend isn't ready to let go, he makes an unwitting deal with the devil in the form of Lloyd Lair, a musician who lacks Rob's talent but will stop at nothing to get what he wants, including murder. Basically, what the story is there is a woman who is obsessed with Rob, an old girlfriend, and he has a current girlfriend, and he wants to pretty much get rid of this other girlfriend from interfering in his life. And Lloyd comes in, and it almost is kind of like a stranger on the train kind of deal, where you do something for me, I do something for you. And he says, I'll take care of your ex-girlfriend problem if you introduce me to people in the music industry. He kind of just shrugs it off. Suddenly the woman turns up missing, and Lloyd says he took care of it. And this story is really good because Lloyd supposedly is involved with devil worship and Satanism, and he, has magic to deal with. But it's a very interesting story. It does have some sexual situations. They're horror book sexual situations, which if anybody has read any kind of horror books, even Stephen King has them. Usually the sexual situations this isn't romance story sexual situations. These are usually a little weird and a little creepy, and that's what's in this book as well. But it really flows well. There are nice twists and turns in the book, and I really can't rate this highly enough. I really enjoyed this book, and I was really surprised about how well I actually liked the book. I'm still giving it a 4-star because the story is somewhat, you've seen it before in a way, but it's still really good. I really enjoyed it. I really like the way she put it together, and it's a great book, and that is Black Magic by R. St. Clair. Next book I'm going to talk about is House of Leaves. This was the pick of the month for Cammie's Corner. I know that a lot of people like this book. Cammie even mentioned my opinions on this book a little bit in her video. I could not get into this book. I understand what it was trying to do. I understand the concept of multiple stories flowing through and kind of connecting. But I felt like there was also a lot of fluff in it. A lot of weird stuff in it that just kind of distracted from the story. While I don't mind them connecting the stories in a way, the way he presented the story just was really weird. And I understand, that was part of the concept. I understand about it. It's hard to explain this book to people. People say, oh, this is a mind-bending, crazy book. It's not that crazy of a book. And I've read some really difficult books before. Like, for example, I read the first book of the Malazan Book of the Falling, I think is how you say it, which is supposedly one of the most complex fantasy novels you can read, which has a ton of characters and a lot of stuff going on. And I had no problem with that book. I could handle that book because even though there was a lot of different juggling around of different storylines, it still was an interesting book, and it had a nice flow. This book, though, oh my god, it just was annoying. It annoyed me. The way it was written was annoying to me. To describe it, it's really probably way too much to describe because there are so many different storylines going on. But basically, there is this film about a house that has bigger dimensions on the inside than the outside, and there is this book based on this film, based on these events. And there's one character finds this book after a person dies, and he takes over their apartment. And it's just a weird story because it links all of these kind of storylines together. The one guy who found the book, and the person who was writing the book, and the documentary, and it has some really weird different kinds of text in here. And while I understand the stories, I understood the different stories, how they went together, I just kind of wish he just didn't do it in this format. I just don't like this format as a book. And I've read different formats. I've read Illuminate, which has a weird format. I've read Dead House, which kind of had the same kind of format. I've read Carrie, which was done in just newspaper clippings. So I'm used to interesting formats, but for some reason this kind of format I just didn't like. I liked the kind of haunted house story. I liked the character, even though basically it was just a paranoid schizophrenic, rambling. I've had experience. I was a psych nurse for 2 years, and I've had family members who had paranoid schizophrenia and manic depressives, and so I have experience with that, but I don't want to read a book written by them because it's usually just gibberish, because the mind of a paranoid person is not something you probably could really want to even explore too much. It's not a pleasant thing. I get what this book was doing. I just didn't like the execution, and I think the story was more, it felt to me like it was almost the author showing off. I'll be honest with you. I felt like the author was just kind of showing off. He said, let me put all of these little strings together, let you try to put all the pieces together. I'm reading a book. I'm not putting a puzzle together. Okay? I'm reading a book. I can understand if it was a murder mystery and I wanted to, figure out who the killer was or something, but this is just a puzzle of a book, putting all the pieces together all at once and dissecting it, and I just wasn't into it. I just, I am not going to read anything else by this author because I've heard that's basically how he writes, is from what I understand. I know he's very highly regarded. I know his other books, or the book I saw was really highly regarded, but I'm just definitely not interested in it. And I probably would give this, I might give it a 3-star because I think it wasn't bad for some people, but for me, it was just something I couldn't get into. And that is my review for House of Leaves. Next book was a reread, technically. I read The Stand by Stephen King. This is the complete and uncut edition, and I originally read the original edition of The Stand. The funny story about The Stand that I'll tell you is I picked up The Stand when I was very, very young. I don't know how old I was, maybe 8 or 9. And I mistakenly thought it was Salem's Lot. This was early Stephen King, and I mistakenly thought it was Salem's Lot. And I remember reading it, and I don't know how far I got into it, but I was like, oh, all this virus stuff, where's the vampires? And I kind of put it down, and I didn't come back to it until a lot later. It wound up becoming one of my favorite books, but I just think it's a funny little story when I first read it. I remember the first copy I had was one of these copies that you're not supposed to sell, because back at the time you would rip off the cover of a paperback if it was damaged, and then get credit to a book publisher. And of course there were some stores that would sell these ripped covered books for like 50 cents or something. So I got like a copy of The Stand with no cover for like 50 cents. So I do remember having that. I don't know whatever happened to that book, but I wound up buying this one, this complete and uncut version, and I really enjoyed this book. It still holds up. It's a great Stephen King book. Basically, it's a story about a plague that ravages the world. The survivors start getting visions, and it's a battle between the forces of good and evil. An end of the world apocalypse type of story, pretty much. And it's a great story because Stephen King does what he does best in this book. He deals with characters. He explores all the characters. He builds and actually destroys a world and then rebuilds a world in this book. And it's a huge chunker. It's one of his huge books. And I know people pick it a lot as one of their favorite books, but this to me is way more enjoyable than it. I enjoyed it too, but The Stand to me is definitely one of my favorite Stephen King novels, and I was really happy to reread it again and realize that it does hold up as a book that I liked when I was younger. That is Stephen King's The Stand. Next book I'm going to talk about is Final Girls by Riley Sager. This is about 3 final girls at the beginning of the story. If you know what the term final girl means, it is the final girl who lives at the end of a horror movie. This is about 3 real-life final girls who are kind of joined together by this one final girl who kind of tries to contact both of these final girls and counsel them in a way. Well, she winds up dying, and our main character, Quincy, is devastated by it and still trying to deal with the ramifications of what happened when she was a final girl. And she meets another final girl who was kind of off the grid because she found out that the doctor, final girl who was putting them together, was actually killed. And it's more of a murder mystery or a psychological thriller, I guess. It's more of a psychological thriller than a slasher type of flick. I mean, they do talk about some of the stuff that happened in each individual case. I wasn't as crazy about it as I thought I would be. It's not a bad book. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't something that I could write home about. I mean, there was some twists and turns. They weren't as shocking to me as I thought they would be. But it's a pretty good psychological horror book. It's a pretty good psychological thriller, pretty good mystery type of book. I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. Again, just not what I expected, I guess. So many people talked about how much I raved about it, so I did want to pick it up. But for me, it was just a typical psychological thriller, and I have read better in my mind. So that is Final Girls by Riley Sager. Another book I read was a short story collection by Kristi Demeester, which is Everything That's Underneath. And this is a book that had like a really cool background with this woman with, I guess, vines coming up from the grave. It looks kind of interesting. I got this from my Nocturnal Readers box. Paul Tremblay put a good quote here: dark, intelligent, relentless collection. But honestly, I was not interested in this. I can't even remember these short stories. I mean, I read through all of them, and I was thinking, maybe I'll find a couple that I could actually comment on that I really liked. There was nothing. There was honestly nothing that I could find that I enjoyed. It was just cliche, and it just did not interest me at all. I was not interested. I didn't like this book. I'm going to give it a 2 stars. It was just, to me, just dull for me. As a horror fan, I could not find anything I can gravitate to in this series. So that is Everything That's Underneath. Next book I read was The Preserve by Patrick Lestewka, who was also Craig Davidson, who was also Nick Cutter. So this is the second book that I read under Nick Cutter's Patrick Lestewka's pen name. And this is about a group of people who get hired by somebody to supposedly take in these criminals that escape. And you find out that they were kind of set up. And it becomes kind of a Most Dangerous Game type of story. Except instead of having, hunters killing, going after them, it is werewolves and vampires and creatures who are going to attack them and try to take them out. I didn't really like this one that much, to be honest with you. I talked about Colosseum, which is the other Patrick Lestewka book. I actually liked Colosseum more because it was a gritty pulp fest of gore and just violence for violence sake. This one I felt was kind of cliche. I didn't really get into the characters as much as I thought I would. I just didn't really care for it. I'll give it like a 2.5 stars. I really didn't find it too good. I think some people might like it, but I just didn't find it as worth a buy for anybody in my mind. And that is The Preserve by Patrick Lestewka. Next book was Cast a Cold Eye. This was a story about Jack Quinlan, an American writer, travels to a small village in the remote western part of Ireland to research a book on the Irish famine. The quiet, picturesque village seems just a place to spend a few months writing, but beneath the placid exterior lurk dark secrets. Why do the locals behave so strangely? Why is Father Henning, the enigmatic parish priest, hiding? And what is the meaning of the strange ritual Jack observed in the cemetery? The search for answers will lead him to a terrifying discovery that the ghosts of the past linger on in the present and they can cry out for blood. An atmospheric, haunting ghost story, Cast a Cold Eye from 1984, is a slow burn horror novel that will keep readers in suspense until the chilling conclusion. I like this more than I thought I would. I wasn't sure if I would like this. I'm not going to give too much away. It's definitely one of those kind of books where the less you know, the better. Just go into it blind and just read it and just let the story follow you along. But I would give it like 3.5. I don't think it's a great story, but it's definitely an interesting story that, again, better than I thought it was. A nice, interesting story that I really liked. Well, not really liked, but a nice, interesting story that I liked. I thought was a pretty halfway decent horror novel. Nice, suspenseful novel, and that is Cast a Cold Eye. Next book I read was The Trench by Stephen Alden. This is the second book in the Meg series. I didn't like this as much as Meg. It's not bad. Again, it's just a little bit more than the average book, but I just wasn't as interested in the characters as much. I'm hoping that the third book will be a little bit more interesting for me, but the second book was just kind of more of the same. I felt like I didn't feel like it didn't add much new. I mean, it did have some interesting action scenes. I just was finding it that it wasn't as engaging as the first Meg book. So I gave it 3.5 stars. Again, I think it's an okay book. Better than what I expected. I enjoyed it, but not as much as I thought I would. And that is Steve Alden's The Trench. Now I'm going to cover Frankenstein, the 1818 text. I read this and I really enjoyed it. I don't think I've ever read Frankenstein. I definitely never read the 1818 text. This is the original version of Frankenstein. Mary Shelley then went back and redid Frankenstein and kind of expanded it and made it more gothic, I guess. This is the original text before that revision. The revision is what most people read when they read Frankenstein, not this version. And I like this version. I don't know what the differences are going to be. Once I read Frankenstein, I'll get to notice, but I really like this version. The character of Frankenstein I only know basically from the movies, the old Universal movies, and really a lot of it's different. It's not the same. I mean, Frankenstein can talk in this, very more intellectual than obviously the Frankenstein from the Universal films. The only scene that I could say was in the film and in the movie was the blind man scene, but it was way more expanded in this book, and it was actually a little bit more heartbreaking in a way in this book. But everything else is pretty much different. There's no lightning. It's basically chemicals that he uses to reanimate the body. It's not this big it's alive type of moment, but I did really like this book. I really enjoyed it. It was a nice book, and I think it still is somewhat relevant to our times as far as people messing around with nature, and it also has some sub themes about abandonment that's really good, and the nature of man. And I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to reading the actual Frankenstein revised edition that everybody reads and see the differences between this and that. But I really like this. I'm gonna give this a 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. Not a perfect book, but I really did enjoy this. And that was Frankenstein, the 1818 text. Now we're coming to the books I really loved this month. And there are 3 of them that I really loved this month. And the first one I'm going to talk about is Kill River. Kill River is by Cameron Roubique. This is the same author who wrote Disco Death Trap. This was, I think, his first novel before Disco Death Trap. And this is just a perfect 80s slasher story. I can't highlight enough, if you are a fan of slasher novels, you should, especially the camp novels like Friday the 13th, you will love this book. This is just a perfect book as far as that goes. The characters are very well drawn as opposed to most horror movies. The characters are very well drawn, and it's basically about this character, Cindy, who her parents want her to socialize more, get out more, so they enroll her in a camp that she's probably way too old for, but she does find some like-minded people and people of her own age that she hangs out with, and they sneak out and go to this water park, and that is where you find the killer. And it's a really good story. It's really tense and suspense-filled, and I can't wait to read Kill River 2 because I really like this one, and I've heard Kill River 2 is just as good, if not better. I highly recommend this. 5 stars for this. Kill River is a great 80s horror novel that if you're a fan of this genre, you should definitely read. And that is Kill River by Cameron Roubique. The next book I want to talk about is Into the Drowning Deep. This is about killer mermaids. Another really good book. I really enjoyed this book. Basically, it's by Mira Grant, who is also Shannon McGuire, I guess is how you say her name, who wrote Every Heart a Doorway and those fantasy novels. She writes as Mira Grant here, which I believe is more of, I guess, her horror writer imprint. And I really enjoyed this book. This is definitely, I'll give it another 5 star. I've seen this listed in the sci-fi section of bookstores, but I really consider this a horror novel. It is about killer mermaids. They are not aerial mermaids. They are very vicious creatures. And the story is basically this documentary crew gets lost at sea after investigating mermaids and creating a documentary for this cable network. You know, there's this big controversy about it as far as it was a CGI thing, and the actual company had some trouble with it. So what they do is, after a couple of years, I believe, they hire another group of people to investigate it. And of course, bad things happen to them as well. And I don't want to get too much into the storyline of it because I don't want to ruin it. But I definitely recommend this book if you like mermaids and you like horror stories. This is a really good story. I was enthralled by it. Like I said, 5 stars. One of my favorite reads of the month, and that is Into the Drowning Deep. Speaking of favorite books, this is my second Bentley Little book that I read, and that is The Association by Bentley Little. Very similar to The Store, actually. I still really enjoyed this, and I really enjoyed The Store. What this story is about a couple that buy a house in a development type of place, gated community, and they have a housing association that they have to join. Knowing Bentley Little, this is the housing association from hell. All the rules and regulations and all the ways that they manipulate the people of this housing development is really interesting. This story is simple. As far as the way Bentley Little writes, I really like his writing because it's really simple writing. It reminds me, I hate to say it reminds me of Stephen King because everyone says that, But it does remind me of a way of how Stephen King writes something really simple and just a basic story, and just things just keep going deeper and deeper, crazier and crazier. You know, there is some sexuality in this that I guess it's a staple for Bentley Little. Like I talked about with Black Magic, it is horror sexuality. So it's a little weird, but it's not overt. It's not a lot, and it still makes the story a very interesting story. I can't rate highly enough. I can't wait to read more Bentley Little books because I've just read 2 of them and I enjoy both of them. He's definitely going to be an author I'm going to start adding onto my list of books that I want to read by him, and that is Bentley Little's The Association. And those are all the books I read this month for my horror and thriller collection. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.